Welcome to Backroom Talk.
Carl, I guess to kick it off before we get into the meat of the conversation today, we're going to talk about tactical athletes. But before we get there, let's do a little documentary review. Do you think that you can pull some generalizations together to start to be able to, lay out principles of programming from?
The organizational requirements. Second tier would be occupational requirements. So I'm in the Army, I'm a lawyer versus a combat medic. But you can practice skills that you're going to have to perform on your job under high levels of stress from exercise safely.
To listen to more Backroom Talk, be sure to subscribe. Learn to design personalized programs with the OPEX system of coaching by heading to opexfit.com.
Let's do it. Guys, welcome to another episode of Backroom Talk. We've got some good stuff to chat on today, but before we get to it, as always, please make sure you subscribe. We appreciate it so very much. If you are on YouTube, hit that like button and make sure you subscribe. And if you're on audio, please subscribe and leave us a review. We thank you very much.
We get a lot of listens through iTunes, right? Or podcasts.
We do, yeah.
We don't have a lot of reviews there.
No.
So I for the first time, I think it was like Monday after we talked, I pulled up the reviews because I was like, oh, maybe we, have some conversations on some bad reviews or something. Because I thought, you get reviews, you'll have some bad ones, but we don't have a lot of reviews. So it'd be nice to see some more reviews, and then we can maybe chat on some of those good or mostly bad reviews on the podcast.
Guys, get on there, leave us a bad review, please, so we have something to talk about. Otherwise, we're just going to sit here and have nothing to say.
Well, there were some because we went from the OPEX podcast to Backroom Talk, so there's old reviews. So there were a couple where they were like, the host is an asshole, blah, 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 and I was like, and then it said he, and I was like, dang, am I coming off like that? And I looked.
She's great.
Yeah, but that was pre Backroom Talk, so it wasn't relevant to us.
Yeah, I mean, the hosts now are great.
Yeah. The old host wasn't an asshole either. Robbie was awesome.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, Robbie's still awesome.
Yes.
He wasn't. Yeah. Awesome guy. I think James is having a conversation with Robbie right now.
Oh, awesome.
Actually, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Robbie, thanks for all the podcast hours you put in for us, and we got it from here.
Yeah. Leave us a review, Robbie.
Please do. So, Carl, I guess to kick it off before we get into the meat of the conversation today, we're going to talk about tactical athletes. But before we get there, let's do a little documentary review.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny. We're talking about Tiger Woods.
Yep.
HBO. What is it called?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it's just called Tiger.
I think you're right.
I think it's just called Tiger. Yeah. HBO. Two-part documentary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's funny because we're talking about tactical athletes today, and I did a quote unquote thing for audio. And Tiger got into that shit.
Yes.
Yeah.
So strange.
Yeah, we didn't even plan that, but yeah,
Yeah.
he got into wanting to become a tactical athlete. But
yeah.
What are your thoughts on the documentary?
I mean, I found it.
Well, let me ask you this first. Did you know a lot about Tiger Woods prior to watching the documentary?
I didn't know.
Okay.
I'd seen the headlines when he had his extramarital affairs. I knew he was really good at this golf thing. I didn't really know how good he was. I have never been a golf fan. Sorry, golf fans. Never watched it. Never, followed any of the Masters or anything. Didn't realize how, huge a winning streak he had, and at what a young age. So seeing such a young athlete excel.
Oof, we'll leave that one. Leave that one.
I think he's a pretty incredible specimen.
Oh gosh, yeah, he is definitely.
Yeah, just seeing the way as such a young guy, a black guy, was able to go into a pretty old white sport and just have the composure that he did at such a young age.
Black and Asian, yes.
Yeah,
he's very particular about that.
Yeah, he is.
He didn't ever want to be called a black athlete, and he got a lot of pushback from the black community because he said that. But he was like, I'm actually half. Was he Filipino?
I can't remember. He had a very interesting term that he used to describe himself that he talked about with Oprah.
Is it Blasian or something?
No,
like
it was more complex because he
Oh, he's a couple other things.
He
as
is,
well, right?
yeah. But
But wait, sorry, I cut you off.
No, just seeing him go into an environment that was not necessarily welcoming to him and just like clean up was really interesting. Incredible mental fortitude to be able to do that, as well as physical skill. But I think my biggest takeaway was because everyone was so scandalized by him, going and sleeping with 17 women, whatever it ended up being. I just can't believe people are shocked when stuff like that happens and when athletes behave poorly. I think society puts, our athletes like up on this pedestal, and we treat them like gods. We make them think that they're untouchable, like they have something that no one else has. And yeah, largely they do. They are incredible, these phenoms, but they're given, everything on a platter. Tiger flies to these clubs in Vegas, and there's women like laid out in front of him, and he's getting bottle service, and he's hanging out with like all of these people who have, similar godlike, phenomenons around them. And what do we expect him to do?
Yeah.
When people give you that, are you not going to take advantage of it? He's a human. And I think people make stupid decisions, but we kind of talk about it with clients, right? Where it's like, there's only so much willpower people have. And if someone is trying to lose weight and, eat a nutritious diet, probably keeping a pantry full of like cookies and chips is not a great idea for them. Set them up in an environment that they're going to be able to be successful in, because eventually willpower is something you can't fight anymore. And I think when it comes to vices like sex and drugs and alcohol, it's not all that different. If it's in front of you, you're gonna at some point reach out and grab it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, good point. I don't know why people are surprised. I mean, I think people are surprised because they see one version of just famous people in general, not just athletes. They see the version, on ESPN when they're winning and doing the fist pump and hugging their fathers and crying and everything looks perfect, right? But they are human beings, right? And every human has flaws, right? You look at the way that an athlete like Tiger was brought up, and when you look at individual sports, the way that you're brought up as an athlete is so much different than the way that you're brought up as a team sport athlete. Individual sport athletes are like, they do that one thing all day, every day, and they don't do another thing. You know what I mean? And they kind of got into that when they were going back and forth on like Tiger and his relationship with his teachers and the dad and the teacher and the how they were butting heads and stuff like that. When I think the teacher said something like, he's missing out on his childhood. It's like, yeah, of course he's missing out on his childhood. The dad wants him to be a phenom. And it's like that with like, figure skaters, gymnasts, all of those individual athlete sports. So it's just exacerbated, right? So think about all of the things that he missed out on from the ages of, 6 to 21 and all of those experiences that he just never got to be a part of. And they talked about it a lot when he, went off to Stanford and like, was this close to disowning his parents and saying, fuck golf, I'm going to, marry this girl. And then his mom and dad sat down and talked to him like, no, you're not. And he's like, okay, I'm going to, get rid of this girl and just focus on just golf. So there was probably something inside of him, over those years as he was, winning Masters and, having all of this great success, where he probably just woke up one day and was like, shit, I'm 25 and I missed out on my entire childhood. And, I don't fucking know what he's thinking in his head, right? Like, I have no idea, but it's very easy to come to the conclusion of like, yeah, let me make up for some things, right? Or, even going to the other side of the spectrum, it's like maybe that was just the way that he's wired, right? Like maybe his vice is, alcohol and women and all of that. And maybe he's always been that way, because there's a lot of humans that are built that way. You know what I mean? So it's like, just because he's really good at golf doesn't mean that he can be resistant to those things, kind of like what you said with like vices. But it was interesting. I think when I heard the stories in like 2000 and gosh, what was that, like 6, 7, 8, whatever that was, when he got caught cheating on his wife, I was a little bit surprised, right? I mean, because my memories of Tiger Woods was like 1996 when he first like came onto the scene, signed a Nike deal. He was like this brown guy that played golf. And I was like, oh man, who is this? That was like when Jordan was huge still and all of that. And I remember going like to the Nike outlet and buying like a Tiger Woods hat and like a Tiger Woods like Nike shirt and stuff like that. And I fucking didn't play golf, right? But he was like this iconic, pop culture figure that was just really cool, right? And he was like a kid, you know what I mean? Like I was probably 10, 11 years old, but he was a kid still, and that's like I just had that like Jordan complex thought of Tiger Woods when I was a kid growing up, and then just like Jordan, right? Like he got exposed of being like this guy with a bunch of vices and very similar to the things that Tiger Woods went through, just not as public as Tiger Woods went through them. But yeah, I mean, it's a story of like, being the best at something in the world, having this massive downfall, and then everyone kicking you while you're down, and then he comes back and wins another Masters, and everyone's like, I knew he could do it. I love Tiger Woods, blah, blah, blah. And now we're actually going through this again because of his latest, the latest thing that just happened to him, I think like last month, where, he almost fucking killed himself. And there's nothing out. I don't think there's anything out on like if he was on drugs or anything like that during that accident last month. But now that's happening again where they're like, oh, Tiger Woods is never going to be able to play golf. He may not ever be able to walk again. And then, I think there's people that are kicking him right now. And then if he does get back on his feet and start swinging a club again, there's going to be a bunch of people saying, I love Tiger, good luck, redemption story, all that thing.
Yeah, not to go too far into it, guys, because if you haven't gone and watched it, you definitely should go watch it yourself if you're interested. It was a good doco. But I loved hearing from the Nike team, and I thought it was fascinating that they spoke out and, had something to say about, did we put too much pressure on him at too young an age with the big sponsorship deal and the way that they built him up as a representative of people of color in the sport of golf. That was a lot of weight for, a young, how old was he at that point?
Oh gosh, I think he hit the pro circuit, I think 15 or 16 years old.
Like that's a lot of pressure to hold at that age,
Yeah.
And a big image to have to live up to.
Yeah.
So
fuck ton of money though, so
yeah.
I don't feel too bad for him.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And none of this is to excuse bad behavior. I just think we need to look at some of the ways that society sets athletes especially up and people of influence up to behave badly and almost loves to see it, right?
Yeah.
They love to see the bad behavior because then they get to watch them fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but personal responsibility, right? I mean, there's thousands of athletes every year that have a similar type of pressure on them, and 995 of them are fine, right? Like they take advantage of the economic benefits from it, and the brand building and thinking about what they're going to do after the sport. But you do have like and this has not, like, I have not researched this at all. I'm just saying the 5, but the 5 that are like the Ryan Leaf. I don't know if you know who Ryan Leaf is, but
I don't.
Anyone that knows who Ryan Leaf is, just Google Ryan Leaf. Like you'll have 5 Ryan Leafs, right? And those are the people that we look at and we're like, ooh, it's because of the pressure. It was because of this. It was because of that. It's like, they probably would have ended up doing similar things even if they didn't sign a $200 million deal with Nike.
Yeah.
So
it was just always in him to behave badly.
Yeah.
Well,
cool. Yeah, it was a good one. I'd recommend it.
Yeah, go watch Tiger.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think in the review that you leave us.
Well, don't nick us if you don't like the documentary. Don't give us a bad review if they don't like it.
No. All right, tactical athletes.
Cool. Yeah.
Should we talk about that?
Yeah, let's do it.
So, Carl, there's a reason why I wanted to discuss this topic with you, and it's one that we get a lot of questions on from our audience and from coaches inside of CCP. But being a tactical athlete is something you've done in your past, and I think I'd like to start the conversation just hearing a little bit from you about your background in the Army. Obviously, you've spoken about it a little bit, but just hearing about what tactical athlete meant to you at that time would be great.
Yeah. I never considered myself a tactical athlete. I just considered myself a soldier in the Army, and that did this very specific job. But yeah, I spent 6 years in the Army. Very long story on how I got there and the exit and all of that and why I decided not to continue. But yeah, I spent 6 years in the Army. Um, for 3 years, we're in Anchorage, Alaska, actually, with the 501st Airborne Division. Um, Went to Afghanistan in 2011. Spent a year in Afghanistan, came back, served the rest of my time with the 501st, and then transferred down to Fort Jackson in Columbia, South Carolina, and went into an instructor role. So I was combat specific for 3 years, and then instructor specific for, actually combat specific for 4 years, instructor specific for 2. So the last 2 years of my military career was extremely lackadaisical. I just worked a couple hours a day and taught, and did a lot of fitness. But what I did on the combat side was I was a combat medic. So yeah, it was interesting. I think that's one of those professions in the military where you get to dip your toes in a lot of different areas. You're an infantryman, right? Because you're going out on missions with M4s and M9s, and you're with an infantry team, and you're doing all the things that you imagine a soldier doing in the Army when it comes to combat, but you're also adding another job on top of that, and that's a medic. So you're like the first line of defense when it comes to getting your teammates off of the battlefield. So it was a good experience. I don't know why. I don't know why exactly I chose to do that. To be quite frank, when I look back, I'm like, oh, I did it because of this. My first MOS was actually a diver, so I was going in as a diver. Longer story. I was supposed to go into the Navy, but decided not to. Went the Army Airborne Ranger route. So I was going in as a diver. Last second, pivoted because I saw this like long-term goal of wanting to be an MD in the Army through the PA program, like PA to MD in the Army. So I was like, a combat medic would because I could have gone right that route, year one, because I came in with a bachelor's degree and that whole thing. And I was like, I want to experience combat before I like do anything outside of that, just because I knew a lot of people in the military, and that was just one thing that was like beat into my head, was like, to really understand this thing and to, quite frankly, like get respect, you have to, get that combat patch, and you have to, be on the quote unquote front lines in terms of military speak. So I did that, combat medic, went in, gosh, training was fairly long for that. So the first year and a half of my career was just training before I actually got attached to a unit. And yeah, that's I won't get too lengthy inside of that, but that's kind of my experience in the military.
What did physical fitness mean to you at that time?
Oh my gosh, something much more than it meant to everyone else. Yeah, because I came in when I was 23 or 24. So, I had all my experience in high school, university, played sports, played a year of professional football, and then went into the military. And I was always, as you could imagine, like very, very addicted to fitness, right? So that didn't change when I got into the military. So before I got in, I thought everyone was going to be like me. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going into this thing, like going into this combat MOS, everyone's going to be, really big, really strong, really fast. I have to get ready for this stuff, right? So I quote unquote over prepared going into basic training, which, you line up and you look at the guys and the girls next to you. Well, in my instance, just the guys next to you, and you're like, wait, what? We're doing the same thing? And yeah, it was very eye-opening. So fitness in my head was like up here. That's how it would be in the military. And when I got there, it was actually down here, where my first couple months in, I was actually giving recommendations to like drill sergeants and instructors and stuff like that, as it related to fitness. And I thought it'd be the other way around. I thought they'd be kind of schooling me, but yeah, you live and you learn.
Why do you think that is? Is it a lack of education, lack of resources? Why is physical fitness, or at least, when you were in the Army, why wasn't it valued and prioritized?
It was valued. I don't think it was prioritized as much as I thought it was going to be prioritized. And quite frankly, it just wasn't needed. Yeah, it wasn't needed to the extent that I thought it was needed either. So I went in misguided. I thought you had to be the fittest person in the world to succeed. It helps, right? And I scaled up the promotion scale very, very quickly because of my fitness levels were a part of it. But fitness isn't the end all be all in the military.
What is?
Oh my gosh, it depends.
Depends what your
It
role
depends
is,
on what you're doing.
right?
Yeah, it
What
depends
you're
on what
trying
you're
to
doing.
achieve.
Yeah. So for me, and what I was doing, fitness was a part of it, right? Because, just kind of put yourself in, I don't know if you've ever, like, if I say, like, what does it look like to go on, 12-hour missions in the mountains of Afghanistan? You can kind of like imagine, like, okay, you have to carry some things, you have to walk for 12 hours. There has to be a level of like physical fitness required to do those things, and to still have the ability to react in a very effective way if you come into contact, right? So it was that, but for me and my job, it was also more, right? Because I was carrying more things, because I was carrying like medical packs and IV bags and extra tourniquets and the whole nine. And I was carrying the same thing that the infantrymen were carrying. I was carrying the same weapon that they were carrying, but I had to, my response in chaos is just a lot different than their response would have been in chaos, if that makes sense. Because if someone gets shot, it's like, or if someone steps on something that blows their leg off, it's like, who's the person that's responsible for that? That would have been me. So, for me, I always thought that, and I kept those thoughts throughout my entire military career in combat, where it's like, I'd need to be the fittest person, on our team, in our battalion, because if X, Y, and Z were to happen, like, I need to be able to handle it. I need to be able to drag. I need to be able to carry. I need to be able to wrap. I need to be able to do all of those things. So yeah, it depends on what your occupation is.
Thanks for answering that. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about the term tactical athlete more broadly, because it's one that people use. We hear it all the time. We use it because it makes sense to people's ears. But do you think that tactical athlete is the right name to call someone who's working in the military?
No. So when I hear the term tactical, like, let's just break those two terms down. I think it's too broad, and I think we need to be more specific. And it's almost disrespectful to just throw everyone into this, like, if you're a firefighter, if you're in the military, if you're a police officer, if you're doing all these things, you're a tactical athlete. And I just don't think that's the case, because if we look at, what does tactical mean? What comes to your mind when you hear the term tactical?
I think about like physically fighting with another human being, like being at war in the purest sense, where you're like in battle.
Oh, okay. I think about something completely different. I
Really?
think about, you have to be calculated. You have to be very prudent. It's almost like a chess match. Like, being tactical is like a chess match. Like, I don't think of anything physically when I think of tactical. I think of, like, you're behind the scenes and you're like moving the chess pieces so you can win this thing, right? So it's more of like a mental thing when we start thinking about like what tactical is. I think athlete, like, now that starts to get into the physicality of it, right? So it's like, when I see those two terms together, tactical athlete, it's like, you have to be a calculated physical specimen, right? Like, that's what tactical athlete really means, in my opinion. Because when I think about athlete, I think about, you're trying to win at something, you're competing, strength, speed, power, all of those things are going to help you. And that's just not the case for every military member, firefighter, police officer, EMT, like, so on and so forth. I don't think they all fit into that definition. So I don't think tactical athlete works for it.
So we should probably just call people by what their specific job or role is.
Yeah. If someone's in the Army, call them a soldier, right? If they're a ranger in the Army, call them a ranger. If they're a Green Beret, call them a Green Beret. If they're a SEAL, call them a SEAL. If they're a firefighter, you know what I'm saying? So I think people just need to be called exactly what they are. And I think that's being respectful to what they do, because you're not just bucketing them into this big, large mass of a bunch of occupations that are doing completely different things in most scenarios.
When it comes to coaches asking questions around, fitness design for tactical athletes, I think they're looking for the consistencies and the commonalities so that they can draw together principles that they could apply to someone that is coming to them, maybe thinking about, entering the military, or someone who's currently working in the military. Do you think that you can pull some generalizations together to start to be able to, lay out principles of programming from?
Military specific, or like, I don't even want to call it tactical specific, but do you mean military specific, or like military, police, fire, all of those things?
I mean military, because I think when you're talking like first responders, police, fire, that is different. So I'm thinking more military.
Yeah, gosh, I think the principles would actually encompass all of them.
You could fit it in.
Yeah, because first responders, they need to have some of the same attributes that military members need to have as well. But it gets so sticky, right? Because we talked about this before, but if you're a lawyer and you're part of JAG in the military versus you're a combat medic, those principles are just different. You know what I mean? Like, this person there's 0% chance that they're going to be walking around with a 60-pound pack through the mountains of Afghanistan with an M4, unless shit just goes completely wrong, right? Like, that's not going to happen for that person. But we do have to look at the organizational requirements, right? Like, this JAG member and this combat medic, they have the same organizational requirements. So to be a part of this big organization called the Army, the physical requirements are the same, if that makes sense. So when I was in, our PT test was 2 minutes max push-ups, 2 minutes max sit-ups, and a 2-mile run as fast as you can. And there were requirements based on age, and there were requirements based on gender for those. And if you didn't meet those requirements, you'd get kicked out. So if you couldn't or if you failed, you'd get kicked out. And then there's levels of, like, there's a point system. So it's like my goal always. I thought those tests were kind of stupid to start, and then as I spent more time in, and I saw, like, the commonalities of people that would fail them and how just in poor physical condition they were in, I was just like, I became okay with them, because I'm just like, yeah, like, everyone should be able to do these things. But my goal in the military was always to be a 300 person, to always completely max out all of those things. And I never went through a PT test where I didn't max out all those things, from like basic combat training to my very last PT test before exiting the military. But me and that JAG member, we had the same test, and our requirements were the same relatively based on our gender and our age. So I would start there. I would look at what are the requirements for that thing, right? If you're a Marine, your requirements are going to be different than if you were in the Army. So you start there in terms of physical requirements. But when we look at just like principles, kind of taking it back to your first question, these people need to be able to manage stress very effectively, right? And I'm not even talking about on the battlefield or on the front lines. I'm talking about just in day-to-day, because in the military, you train a lot. Depending on what unit you're attached to, you train a lot. Like, we probably put in, gosh, I don't even want to guess. We put in a lot of hours of training every single week. And in my brain, I was like, half the time I'm like, this is so pointless. But then you get into those scenarios where you actually use your training, and you're like, ooh, now I understand why we did all of this. So, stress management in terms of being able to organize your life and organize stress inside of your life. Because for us, it was waking up every morning, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. You go, you do PT. Our units, the units that I was always attached to, we had very, very challenging physical training first thing in the morning. And that wasn't even, for me personally, that wasn't even my training for the day. That was just like my Army PT. So that was like an hour and a half. Then I'd eat breakfast, and then we'd work. And then my lunch break, I'd actually go to the gym and I'd train for 90 minutes. I'd do like my own training for 90 minutes. And then I'd go back to work, and then I'd go home at night, and then I'd do the same thing until, we have those days where it's like, okay, you got to wake up at 2 in the morning because you have to do a jump today. You have to do, you know, some medical training in the field. You have to do this, you have to do that. And then you get back home at midnight. Just imagine how that can compound over time. And if you can't manage just daily life stress, physical and life stress, this is going to happen very quickly. And that's what I saw a lot in the military. I saw guys that just looked like shit. It's like, wait, what? You're 25? You look like you're 50. And it was just because they weren't able to manage stress on a day-to-day basis. And not even talking about deployments and all that. I just mean like training, life, family, drugs, alcohol, like a bunch of shit would just compound, and their lifestyles were just terrible. So stress management would be number one.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that concept of the stress bucket all the time, right? You've got this like finite bucket here, and you've got so many things that you can put into it through exercise, through work stress, through relationships, through the food you eat, through alcohol. And if there's too many stresses going in all at once, it's going to overflow, and we're going to end up with water on the floor. So how much capacity do you actually have to control those stressors going in? If you're waking up at 3:30, if you're eating meals that you're not necessarily preparing for yourself?
Gosh, you have a lot. You have a lot of control outside of the things that you can't control. So, I don't know. I'm a little different. Like, I think I deal with stress a lot differently than most people. I'm very calm. I don't let things like get to me. You know, I don't know. So I know that not everyone is like that, but when in the military, you always know what you're doing. There's not a lot of times where they're like, pack up, we're going away for a week. Like that doesn't happen very often in the regular military. It does happen quite often for like, you know, Green Beret, SEAL, stuff like that. Regular military doesn't happen, right? So it's like you have the opportunity to sit down and organize your schedule, organize your day. And I was always really good at that. Like I knew, you know, if I was waking up at 2:30 because I had this jump, and I knew that and when I say jump, I just mean like, you know, jumping out of airplanes for training purposes, like jumping out of airplanes and then doing like a 6 hour like mock mission after you land, just to kind of prepare for what you will probably never see overseas, but they need to fill time with something. So if I knew I was doing that 3 a.m. and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to have time on my own until, you know, 3 p.m., I just, you know, organize my day appropriately, right? Like you said, like, you know, for people that don't have the opportunity to eat the foods that they want to eat and all that stuff. I was the weirdo that had like my rucksack that was 65 pounds instead of 63 pounds because I always had like food inside of that thing. You know what I mean? Like I was always very, very prepared. So yeah, I think you just need to, you know, when we start talking about like stress management, you need to just organize things well, you know what I mean, and appropriately. And that's just a personal trait, right? Like that's a personality trait, which has nothing to do with, you know, military versus this versus that. I think that's just a personality trait that'd be very beneficial for anyone, no matter what the heck they did.
Yeah, I mean, those are habits that we work on with our, you know, civilian clients. So is that something that a coach could potentially work on with a military client or a first responder?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And it's tough if you haven't experienced it though. You know, it's tough to truly coach someone that's going through those things if you haven't really gone through those things, or you haven't put a lot of time and effort into studying what that looks like, what the day-to-day looks like. Because it's just different. It's almost like a bizarro world in the military. You're living here, but you're almost in a different world based on like rules that you have. Like there's like laws inside of the military that you don't have in real life, and that's why I say it's kind of like a bizarro world. You're like living in this world inside of our world. Your schedule is wacky. You're like doing a bunch of like tactical training here. Like it's just really weird. And if you haven't experienced it, it can be hard to grasp and understand from a coach's perspective. So yeah, you know, if you're a coach and you haven't experienced it yourself, you know, study up on it, you know, talk to people that have experienced it, and also realize that every unit is completely different. So my experiences are actually going to be a lot different than, you know, someone that was in, you know, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, because of the way that their unit, their battalion, so on and so forth runs day to day.
So stress management.
Stress management, very important. Yeah.
What's second principle?
Second one is the ability to preserve oneself, right? So self-preservation. And what I mean by that, and it's almost, it goes hand in hand with stress management. From a coach's perspective, when we look at self-preservation and we look at, training military personnel, less is always more. Less is always more. Because volume, we talk about training volume, but like volume of stress in the military is just so high. It's really high. From a physical perspective, depending on what you do, can be fairly high. And then from a mental, emotional standpoint, it's very, very high. Especially if you have someone that's like preparing to go on a deployment. There's a lot of shit that's going inside of someone's head when they know that they're leaving, their home and their families or whatever the case may be for 9 to 18 months, right? Like that's very, very stressful for someone. So, less is always more in those circumstances. And especially when we look at giving people a lot of exercise, because it's challenging for a lot of people to organize, their brains around coming up with a schedule that works really well for them, to organize their brains around, what they should or should not do in the gym. And that's why a coach should be there, right? So we can't look at, training someone that's in the military the same way that we look at training you or I, because we can organize our schedules around, our training time and all that, and we can make that perfect and beautiful. But for someone that's in the military, you just never know, right? Like their schedules are so wacky. So self-preservation.
Self-preservation.
Yeah.
All right. Was there one more principle?
Yeah, I think we talked about
Keeping it job specific, right?
Well, yeah, let me hit on this really quick as well. I think it's because we talked about stress management, but another thing is having the ability to deal with stress and still do your job at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like, for a military member, that would be, you do all of this training and then you find yourself in a combat situation. It's like, how do you still do your job under high amounts of stress, right? Like, I'm not asking you that. I'm just saying, like, you have to start thinking about those things. So it's like, how do you perform under high amounts of stress? For firefighters and police officers, how do you perform when stress is at its highest? It's through training. Right? So we always used to say you have to fall back on your training. I remember, when we were preparing for our first deployment, we had an awesome PA, physician's assistant. He was just an awesome dude. He was a combat medic before he got it. He had deployed like 16 times or something. Just an awesome dude. And he would have us doing just like the most monotonous, mindless things over and over and over and over as they related to, on the point combat medicine. It'd be like, tourniquet training. We would put in we probably put in 10 hours a week and like putting tourniquets on someone's groin or in their armpits. We would do that 10 hours a week. You're like, why the fuck are we doing this so much? And that's just one example, but I'll just continue with that example. And then I remember the first time I had to put a tourniquet on someone in real life, right? Like, I definitely had to fall back on my training because my brain wasn't working, right? Like, you just go numb, right? Like, you see a human being on the ground and a limb is missing. That shit gets really real at that point. If we hadn't done that much tourniquet training, that person would have probably died, because I probably would have froze. But my brain was like, it turned off, and I just fell back on my training, right? So I didn't have to try to like rise to the occasion. I didn't have to try to like pump myself up, because that's not possible. You know what I mean? You have to fall back on your training, because that's what you will do. And if you don't have training, you're going to make a bad decision, or you're going to freeze up and not do anything. So, stress management would be number one. Self-preservation would be number two. And then number three is you have to have the ability to fall back on your training. So what does that mean? You have to train a lot. You have to train a lot.
Obviously, there's very specific training to something like putting a tourniquet on, which you need to be able to do in your role as an Army medic. What about physical training, like stuff that's happening in the gym? Does that offer any support when it comes to being able to perform in a stressful situation?
Yeah, you can try to replicate, right? So when we start to look at what's happening physiologically when we're under a lot of stress, we can use exercise to try to recreate that response. It's only going to be to a certain degree, right? So like, let's say, hopefully no one's ever in this situation, but let's say someone's lying in front of you and they're missing their arm, right? Like that's a 100 out of 100. You could probably get to a 60 out of 100 through physical activity. You know what I mean? Like you're super tired. You can't think. Cortisol and stress is really high. Heart rate is really high. You're almost just trying to replicate that situation, and you could do that through physical activity to some extent. And, now you can start to practice, and you have to be like, it has to make sense, right? But you can practice skills that you're going to have to perform on your job under high levels of stress from exercise safely. Don't do Fran and pull a gun out in your gym and start shooting at a target, right? But you can start to see where that kind of stuff can make sense in a very controlled and safe environment.
What's the balance between, because we talked about stress management as number one, and obviously training like that can start to put more stress on top of people if there's not.
Pre-competition phase.
True.
Yeah, so it's phases of training.
Yeah, I never even thought about that.
Yeah, so I deploy, in 2023. Am I doing that today? No, probably not, right? I'm like building a nice baseline. Lifestyle is really good. I'm really focusing on what my unit has me doing. You're coaching me, so you're giving me some really good stuff that's going to, prepare me for that pre-competition phase. And competition is deployment, right? So that's the pre-competition phase. Or we're preparing for that pre-competition phase 3 months out. Maybe we're doing stuff like that because now it starts to become beneficial. Because I think I knew where you were going with that. It's like we're trying to manage stress, but we're also doing it. It's like imagine coaching a fucking CrossFitter, right? Are you doing 21-15-9 as hard as you can all year round? You probably shouldn't be, right? Stress management, self-preservation, and being able to mimic those things in competition, right? So it's like you got to ramp them up and get them ready and peak for that thing.
Just go back to the principles. Yeah. It applies to whether that person is competing in CrossFit or they're in the military. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to go into some more job-specific example?
Yeah, I think well, let's hit on, because when you asked me, what are my thoughts on tactical athletes, the first thing that came to mind actually were people that don't even do this shit for a job. They just do it and like they'll like post it on Instagram where they'll like put on, a bulletproof vest and, they'll be shirtless and they'll have like veins popping out and they're like flexing and shooting a rifle, you know what I mean? And they're like
Tiger Woods.
And posting that thing on Instagram and they're called, and like they'll hashtag tactical athlete. So it's like, that's why I think and there's like, do what you got to do. I'm not like judging people for doing that. All I'm saying is that we can't bucket people that do that for a living, and that's what they do, with those same people. So if those people are calling themselves tactical athletes, cool, let's let them have that term of tactical athlete, and let's call these other people like soldiers, Marines, all of that, let's call them what they are. So that's where my head immediately went when you asked me what are my thoughts on tactical athletes. I thought about the person, with the big muscles and veins shooting an M4, and they fucking own a gym. They don't even do anything like that. You know what I mean? So, and gosh, we'll go there. And a lot of those people have zero fucking experience in those professions. So that's what's just wacky, right? Like that's so weird to me. It's like you're trying to be something that you're just not.
What do you think that is? Like it's a peacocking thing? It's looking for a thrill?
It's in right now. Yeah, it's in. It's sexy right now. But I don't want to discredit the people that actually enjoy it though, right? Like so I do want to, like if that's someone's hobby where they're like hey, I like to incorporate like fitness and shooting guns and all that stuff. It's like, that's cool. Like, I don't have any problems with that. But I just don't want those people bucketed in with people that are doing it as a profession and they're doing it full time.
Very different demands.
Yeah, yeah, super different.
Yeah, okay. Good to wrap my head around that one a little bit. So it makes sense to me that let's talk about football. So you are a coach that's working with football players, and you have someone who's a quarterback, and then you have someone who's a linebacker, right? Very different.
Georgia, I'm really proud of you. You're getting positions. This is great. All right, let's go.
These guys have very different demands. Like what they do in their sport is going to be super different. So the way that you train those two athletes is probably going to look pretty damn different, right?
Yep.
Same thing applies to people with different roles inside the Army. Yep. Could you give us some examples of what that actually like might look like when it comes to physical training that's being written out?
Yeah, let's do this. Let's break it down into a couple different tiers or ideas. So you have what we talked about, like the organizational requirements. Second tier would be occupational requirements. So I'm in the Army, I'm a lawyer versus a combat medic. Different. Now we actually have event-based requirements. So we have people in the military that are always doing education and going through schools. And these are like physically based schools, right? So you have someone that's JAG, they're a lawyer, but they're getting ready for Ranger School. So now their physical requirements completely flip, because now you're not preparing them to be a lawyer anymore and just going through like the day-to-day of doing whatever they're doing in the office. You're getting them ready to go to Ranger School, right? Or you have that combat medic and they have this expert field medical badge training or event coming up. Now you're not getting them ready to just become or be a medic on a day-to-day basis. Now you're getting them ready for this very specific event. So that's something that happens a lot in the military, event-based physical requirements. So those events can be schools, those events can be deployments, those events can be like military-based competitions. There's just so many physically based things that happen inside of the military. So I would break it down into those three tiers: organizational requirements, occupational, and then event-based.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, the event-based, you see that coaching CrossFitters, the different competitions that they're going to, different layouts, like whether they're going to the CrossFit Games or competing in the Open or some like one day like 24-hour running clock where they have to hit WODs every hour on the hour. Like, they're different events that they're preparing for.
That's when you just say, good luck.
Just survive.
Good luck. Have fun with that one.
Yeah, sounds like a blast.
But no, I don't think that answered your question. But the linebacker versus the quarterback, the occupations would just be what we laid out with the lawyer versus combat medic, and even we can look at like police officers, right? Are you a part of the SWAT team, or are you a police chief? You know what I mean? Like, you can start to imagine how those requirements would be the same. Or if you're a firefighter, like, are you going out and you're putting out fires on a daily basis, or are you office based? Are you like a fire chief? So there's so many occupations in the military and in first responders that it should be very, very job specific in terms of, as a coach, what you're doing for that person on a day-to-day basis.
So what you're telling me is there's no one perfect training split and template for everyone that's in the Army and one for everyone in the Navy.
No, there's not. Because it's I think we put a lot of and we do this because we're fitness coaches, right? I think I said this at the beginning, but we put too much onus on the physical. It's like, it doesn't matter that much. You don't see, man, sorry if you guys have seen this, but I haven't seen a lot of people die because they weren't fit enough, like physically fit enough, like they weren't strong enough, fast enough. I haven't seen that a lot, especially in this day and age. I'm sure that was the case in World War II, but we don't see a lot of people dying because they're not fit enough, in the military specifically. So it's like, when we look at physical requirements, we need to look at what is fit enough and where can we actually spill over. Because I didn't tell this story, but I spilled over a lot when I was in the military, where I was actually worse at my job because I put too much onus on fitness. Like I did, weightlifting competitions, powerlifting competitions, bodybuilding, physique competitions. That was like right in the middle of my military career, where I'm like, walking around at 3.5% body fat with zero energy.
That's not self-preservation
That's not
or stress management.
at all, right? At all, right? But it's like, that's an example of someone putting so much onus on the physical, where it's like, just be fit enough. You know what I mean? But people have their own goals. That's where we run into not issues, but that's where reality sits. It's like, I think a lot of military members, they say they do it for their job and their occupation, but we're actually doing it for ourselves and our own goals. Because if we were actually doing it for the job and the occupation, we look at those organizational requirements, we pass or max those organizational requirements out, and we should be good, right? In most cases, no. Like, we want to get better, we want to be better, and I that was me. That still is me. I appreciate that. But we have to understand that we don't have to find like this secret sauce in exercise with military people.
So if you're a coach, should you be looking at those organizational requirements and making sure that your client can meet them? If they can't, train them to meet them and have that be what you're basing your design around?
If that's what your client wants. Yeah. You can't come to those conclusions for your client.
True. They might have goals, like you said, that go beyond just the job.
Yeah. Or they may not give a shit about those organizational requirements. And who are we to say, like, nope, the test is different now. I don't know. It's like trap bar, deadlift, broad jump, bunch of craziness. But, maybe someone's like, I don't actually give a shit about 2 minutes of push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. I don't care about maxing that out. I like exceed minimum requirements, and I'm good with that because I don't get extra, brownie points for maxing this thing out. So yeah, the client or the military member needs to be the one that tells the coach what they're trying to get out of this thing, and then the coach needs to understand, what those requirements are for their job or for their profession, or if they're getting ready for something that's event-based, they need to understand the requirements that are needed to be ready for that thing. Because the requirements to, go to Ranger School for 2 months are a lot different than the requirements to deploy for 12.
So there's just like this. Obviously, we have the principles to follow and to go by, but it does feel, for someone that's never been in the military and never, experienced what that's like, it feels hard to know where to begin. But where you begin is probably, like you said, understand what the job is. And then secondarily to that, just because someone is in the military or a first responder doesn't mean that we forget everything that we already know about fitness and like throw out, all the rules of, we have a novice client who doesn't have a big training age. They should probably be doing a full body resistance with some longer, slower aerobic work.
That's plenty.
Right?
That will do it. That will do it. I mean, when we start to look at fitness principles, just because you're in the military doesn't change fitness principles. Yeah, the principles are the exact same. But we have to understand what those FMEs are that are being tested in the military, and we have to ensure that we are training, to meet those requirements or to exceed those requirements and what those FMEs are. And then the principles are the principles. We train like we should as human beings. And our OPEXs, our basic requirements for someone being able to move effectively, those are very, very good starting point, right? Sometimes I think we look at like I wouldn't even call it the sexy stuff, but we look at the obvious stuff of like, oh, okay, this person's in the military. They need to be able to ruck 12 miles in this amount of time. And we go like directly there and we're like, gosh, this person can't touch their toes yet though. It's like, still fucking start with being able to touch your toes, right? So yeah, I mean, the principles are still the principles. Yeah, I'd start there no matter what someone's occupation is.
Just for anyone that doesn't know the language, FMEs would be fitness monitoring exercises. So like a metric that you're checking in with that client over time. And just like last point there, I think, we're OPEX. We talk about personalization, individualization. We put a lot of emphasis on the individual. And that, I think, sometimes makes us feel like we have to get super specific. And we think about that like person's job in that 12-mile ruck, and we're like, that's what we're designing for. But we forget that we do also have more global general ideas around what it means to be a fit, functional, healthy human being. And that, you know, most people probably need to fit into this, you know, framework of what we define as being fit enough, based on function. No matter what their function is, they're probably going to going to have to be able to do all of these things. So let's start there. Let's start with the general, and then we can get more specific once we make sure those things are ticked off.
Yeah, and always check yourself as a coach when you're coaching a military member, and look at how much you're giving them, and most likely it's too much. Where you start is most likely too much. I'm telling you, yeah. I mean, volume is one of the most important considerations when training military members. You gotta keep it low enough so they can do their freaking jobs. Yeah. So I think that's really important to keep in mind.
You said something very similar at the end of our sport training, field sport athlete training podcast.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah. There's definitely some similarities there. Yep. You got to be able to do the thing that you're doing. Although I don't consider military members athletes because they're not competing in anything. You're still training them to produce this very specific outcome, and it's the same with field sport athletes. You're training them to produce this very specific outcome on the field. It's like, keep your eyes on that outcome.
Yeah, training is not the goal.
No, yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, we want to make it the goal. I wish it was the goal. It was the goal for me. Yeah, it definitely was. I didn't tell this story, but I always ran that PT that I was talking about. I was always the one that designed that for our entire battalion. And holy shit,
You messing people up?
Let's just say this. I got more people fitter than the people that I messed up. Yeah, so I ran the regular PT program, and I ran the remedial PT program. So remedial was for people that couldn't pass the PT test. So that was fun, though, working with those guys and those girls in the remedial program, because we saw some really good successes over there. But yeah, I kicked the shit out of us pre-deployment. Right. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize.
Well, Carl, appreciate all your insight that you brought to this, and appreciate your service as well.